Our third and final demo is going to look at Uipath. This is the Uipath application. In the middle of the screen in a moment we're going to start doing our development, and on the left of the screen you can see the different actions we can perform. Our first step when using Uipath is not to develop the automation from the ground up, although we can do that, but is often to record a sequence of events as we would normally perform the actions as a user, and we then modify those events to make them more generic in order to use them in a more flexible way. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to record simply updating the contacts database in the way a user would do that, and it will store all of the steps that we undertake within the main window. To give it a bit of structure, I'm going to create a sequence, and I'm going to call that sequence our training DB update. Good. So let's do a recording. As you can see, I've already opened the training database, and the first thing we will normally do in an action is start an application. And part of the recording, we can do that simply by clicking on the running application. Uipath will work out where that application sits, so it knows exactly where to recall it from later on. Right, we'll start recording. The first step, click Contacts. All of this is being stored. The New button. I'm going to temporarily stop the recording, hitting Escape, and drag that over so you can actually see it in the recording area, and then I'll carry on. So again, salutation, Mr. First name, Rob. Last name, King. Email, rob@mail. And while all these things are fixed at the moment, we'll turn them into variables when we go back into the application. So we'll click Add. There we go. And we'll see that added into the screen. And now I'll hit Escape. And I'll drop this down and I'll ask Uipath to close the app. That's great. That's everything I need recorded, and I'm going to save that. And here you can see the sequence of steps that I went through. First of all, opening the training CRM, clicking the tab, and again you can see the visual images of what I've done in a similar way to many of the applications we've seen. You can see us clicking on the New button and then typing the word Mr. into the salutation field. Obviously we're going to be changing that to a variable a bit later on. Rob into the first name, King into the surname, the email address, and then the Add button, which I seem to have clicked twice, so I don't need both of them. I can remove that one. And then finally the application will be closed. So most of the steps of the process now have already been done for us. If I run that again, it will simply update the training application with the data I've just pre-populated. So I've adapted the screen area to just try that again, so you can see all the information on the screen this time. So I'll run that, and you can see the data item going in there unchanged from what we defined. And so our next step is to make that now more generic. And here's where we hit some of the differences again between the different applications. Different applications provide different types of input-output routines and methods. And the method for capturing data from the screen via dialog boxes is quite simplistic in Uipath. But there are many other tools at our disposal that it provides to really add more powerful ways of storing data. And the one we're going to try is to use Excel. I've created this file with two records which I want to update. And so what we're going to do is we're going to open this Excel spreadsheet read the lines from the spreadsheet and update the data using that instead. So what do we need to do? Well, the first thing I'm going to do is I need to read it ahead of the update that we've just recorded. So this recording sequence, again, I'm going to give it a better name. This is the update training DB. And this one, the higher level sequence now, is read data and update training DB. Good. So we're going to add our first of our Excel functions. As you can see, there are several different Excel functions at our disposal for reading, writing and manipulating spreadsheets. Uipath can manipulate spreadsheets either natively, i.e. directly to the applications, or via using the Excel functionality. So it loads Excel and you see it happening for you on the screen in front of you. What that differences are is it means that you can run some of these functions without Excel installed on your actual application. So our first step is always, when using Excel, is to actually identify what is the name of the Excel spreadsheet that we're dealing with. And I've located the demo spreadsheet on our desktop. So having now identified the spreadsheet, our first step is going to be to read the range of cells. And there we go, read range. Now, by not specifying the exact range, it's just going to read the cells it can find. So it'll just read those first two rows. We're going to jump into something a little bit more complicated than we've looked at in some of the other demos. This time we're going to loop around the data. For each of the rows in the spreadsheet, we want to go away and update the training database. So our next step is to find a for each. Right. And there we can see for each row function. I'm going to drag that across. Now, when we read the range, I missed a step out. That was an accident, but I can go back and correct it now. When we read the range, we have to specify the variable into which that range is being stored, and this is the output over here. And if I right click a cell, it gives you the opportunity to create a new variable. Let me just move that around a bit so you can see that better. So if I right click the empty cell, you get create variable as an option. And I can create a brand new variable called DT1. A data table is just a two-dimensional table that we can manipulate one row at a time. And we can see, there we go, there's our DT1 variable having been created. So we can now say for each row in DT1, what do we want to do? Well, the first thing we want to do is extract those 4 different variables that we need. So I'm going to create an assignment. There we go. And again, I'm going to create a brand new variable called title. Actually, I've made a mistake there. Let me just correct that. So having for each row, the first thing I want to do is now get a row item. And get row item allows us to get from a row the very first column. So the very first column is actually column 0. If we'd have included headings in the table, then we could actually have used the names here, but the table didn't have any names. So an actual column names is probably a more robust way of managing the process, but this is just a simple demo. And again, we've got an output value, so we can create our variable here of title. Oh no, it exists. Title, there we go. So the output is put to title. And we're just going to repeat that for the 4 different rows. So that was the four different columns. That was the first column. The next column is number 1, and that contained the field first name. So we now have column 0, which is the title, column 1, which is the first name, column 2, which is the surname, and finally column 3, which is the email. So you can see at the bottom of the screen we've created some new variables which we can now start to pass into the code that we've produced earlier. But now is a good point to start to just look at what we've created here. We've started to create a loop going around gathering this data for each of those fields. So the update training DB module that we created earlier wants to sit inside that loop. So we've now got those 4 row items and now opening the training CRM and starting to work our way through the process we saw before. Now instead of Mr, we can put the variable title. Instead of Rob, the first name. Instead of surname, instead of King, I'll put surname. And instead of the email address, the variable email. So that's passing in those variables that we've just looked at. Now, we are ready to run the application, but I'm just going to go back to the beginning of the Excel read range, and I've want to go back and look at some of the properties there because I recall that I've missed out one of the sections. By default, it believes there should be headers in the file, and I need to uncheck that. Otherwise, it will use my line with my details in as the header row. Okay, with that correction, we're ready to go. Let's run. Great. So the application has gone into the spreadsheet, selected the first row, updated the CRM application, selected the second row, updated the CRM application, and closed down. One final thought on Uipath before I close out on this demo is that Uipath does provide you with the ability to create library code. So store snippets of code that you can reuse over and over again. These snippets are not quite as powerful as the functionality we saw in NICE with separate modules, but do provide a big leap in that direction. So again, lots of pros and cons and subtle differences between the applications that you need to sort of weigh up when thinking about which is the right tool for you. Putting it all together as we've seen with other software, we have our physical objects, which we recorded as we went through the recording process and didn't have to go through that as a separate step. We have a simpler presentation layer, this time using an Excel source file, but that source file gives us the business logic of reading the data from Excel and processing each row. And then we have a separate module which now does the functionality of launching the CRM, clicking the Contacts tab, clicking the New button, copying the details and clicking add and closing the CRM. Now there are some efficiencies that we can make because, for example, the launching the CRM app and closing the CRM app, we could now do around the reading of these individual records. So we can make this much more efficient by simply opening the app once, processing all the records and then closing the app.